This is Christian Book Blurb, brought to you by author and songwriter Matt McChlery. Get a behind-the-scenes glimpse into the lives of some of your favourite Christian authors, hear about their books and faith. Also, why not check out my website, mattmcclery.com. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Book Blurb podcast. I'm your host, Matt McChlery, and I'll be chatting to another Christian author about their books, their faith, and their life. Thanks for joining us. Now, if you've clicked on this podcast today, I'm really glad you have, because this is a unique episode. I've never recorded an episode like this one before, and I may never get the opportunity to do so again. I don't know. Well, I hope I do, actually. It's an amazing episode, an amazing story, talking to a remarkable young man. His name is Jonathan Bryan, and he's written a fantastic book called I Can Write, but it's as in I spelt in like the eye that you see with, so it's E-Y-E, I Can Write, and that becomes apparent a bit later on in his story as to why his book is called this, and we'll be getting into that in a little while. I first met Jonathan. He's now 16 years of age. Remarkable young man. I met him in last year. I was at the Association of Christian Writers conference, and there were keynote speakers, and there were workshops, and time for networking and chatting and getting to know people. It was a great time. And Jonathan Bryan was one of the keynote speakers, and I tell you what, his session was incredibly moving and powerful. He had a standing ovation at the end. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, and I know it profoundly moved me, but it's also affected the way I view people with disability. And it's amazing. Jonathan himself, he is a confident, bubbly young man, but he is wheelchair bound. He cannot control his legs or his arms, and he cannot speak. So he discovered that he could use his eyes to point to letters of the alphabet on a perspex board and spell words out. And that is how he communicates, and hence why his book is called I Can Write, because he literally writes with his eyes. I'm on his website at the moment, icantalk.net, and I'm going to read you just a little bit about this part of his story. So he says, until I was 9 years old, I would not have been able to write this, but using my eyes like a finger pointing or a pencil, my mother taught me to read and write. A year and a half after I was first taken out of my special school to be taught, I started to use my eyes to spell out everything I wanted to say and write on an alphabet board known as an E-tran frame. My eyes became my voice. And since that day, in February 2015, life has been busy. Life has been transformed, and crucially, life has been fulfilled. So it is an honor to have Jonathan Bryan on the show today. But how did we do it? This is an audio podcast, and this is why I'm saying it's such a unique episode. The way we've done it is I typed up some questions and emailed them to Jonathan. Jonathan then wrote his responses and then asked his friend to then read out his responses to my questions. And then they emailed over the audio recording of the friend's reading of these responses. And then I've managed to edit things together to make it into this podcast. So, without further ado, welcome Jonathan Bryan to the Christian Book Blurb podcast.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me on your show.
It's really good to have you here. Thank you for joining us today. So at the start of this episode, I've given our listeners a little bit about your background and your disability. But I was just wondering if you would be able to explain to our listeners what your condition is and how it affects you.
When my mother was pregnant, she was in a car accident, and I suffered a placental abruption, which starved my body of blood and oxygen. Following this, I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy and end-stage renal failure, and I received a kidney transplant just before my 4th birthday. After my transplant, I contracted the adenovirus, which left me oxygen dependent. The combination of these disabilities has left me with a worn-out body, but an alive mind.
Now, I met you a few months ago, last year, when you were giving a presentation at the Association of Christian Writers retreat. It was amazing, and I know you have a very fascinating story to tell. Your book, I Can Write, a memoir of a child's silent soul emerging, is truly magnificent. Firstly, why choose the title I Can Write with the spelling of the first word as E-Y-E and not I?
I communicate using my eyes on a Perspex board called an e-tran frame. A communication partner holds the board and I look at a group of letters which are colour-coded, so I then look at a colour. For each letter, there are 2 eye movements. My communication partner points at where I'm looking, and at its very fastest, with a separate person spelling out the words and using prediction, I can spell out 17 words a minute, while an average person speaks at 250 words a minute.
Well, that's amazing. Amazing not only that you can communicate, but also the extra effort that it must take you to spell those words. But I'm really glad you can, because you communicate really, really well. What was it like for you living with your condition and being unable to communicate before the e-tran frame, and yet being fully aware of what people were saying around you? Did you find people treated you differently because of your disability?
There is nothing more frustrating than being treated like a pre-verbal toddler just because you don't speak. I call this special. It's a mixture of the intonation reserved for a baby, mixed with how you talk to a foreigner with little understanding. Slow, loud, and clear with short sentences.
It's really fascinating getting your perspective on that. I remember that's one of the things you spoke about at the retreat where we met, and it really has impacted me and really made me think about the way that I speak to and treat people who can't talk, and that actually, to be careful not to treat them like a pre-verbal toddler. So thank you for that. Thank you for opening my eyes in that regard. Now, you have written a really good book called I Can Write. Why did you write this book? What was the inspiration behind it?
There are many non-verbal children in wheelchairs who are not taught to read and write in special school. And for them, I want to make a difference and show people what is possible. Being non-verbal is not the same as being a pre-verbal toddler, and I want to challenge assumptions about disability. Finally, it was important to me that my faith remained integral to my story, as it is in my life. Writing is my passion, and I want to show that non-verbal children deserve to be taught to read and write. My faith is a big part of my story, so I need to share the hope that I have. All of the proceeds from my book go to the charity I founded, Teach Us Too, campaigning towards a world where all children are taught to read and write, regardless of their educational label or disability.
That sounds like a very worthy cause, and I'm really impressed that such a young person has managed to start a charity. For our listeners, that charity is called Teach Us Too, and I will be giving further information as to websites and things where you can find out more about Jonathan and his book, as well as the charity Teach Us Too, later on in the show, so do stay tuned for that. Jonathan, just before we take a short break, I wanted to find out how has finding your voice through writing changed your life?
For non-verbal children like me, being able to read and write totally transforms our lives, and it's for this reason that I set up my charity, Teach Us Too. Many people don't realise that learning to read and write is not a skill which is taught automatically to non-verbal children, especially those who are labelled with profound and multiple learning difficulties. Yet being literate gives us a key to expressing ourselves in our own words. Before, I was like a bird in a cage. Now I'm flying free in the open air. Throughout my life, I've been able to use non-verbal communication. There's nothing like being able to communicate my thoughts and feelings using words. Life is richer, life is deeper, and life is fulfilled.
That's really beautiful. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for sharing your life story and your insights with us. I do hope that you're finding this conversation I'm having with Jonathan Bryan really interesting. We will be back with Jonathan after these short messages. Hi, I'm author Matt McChlery. My new book, The Prison Letters, a 40-day devotional for Lent, will take you on a thematic journey through the books of Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. Packed full of personal anecdotes and wisdom, the message Paul conveyed to his readers during his imprisonment is brought to life. The Prison Letters devotional is available now from my website, mattmcclery.com, and wherever good books are sold. Get your copy today. If you enjoy listening to this podcast, you can help keep it on the web. All you've got to do is buy me a coffee. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/mattmcclery to make a donation. There is a link in this episode's show notes. So go on, buy me a coffee today and help this podcast to keep supporting Christian books and authors. Well, welcome back to the Christian Book Blurb podcast. This is a unique episode where I am interviewing Jonathan Bryan, the author of the book called I Can Write, a Memoir of a Child's Silent Soul Emerging. Jonathan, one thing I wanted to know about your writing process is how long did it take you to write your book? Using your iBoard and all the various processes involved in actually creating a book?
My book took me 9 months to write and 4 months to edit.
Well, that's really impressive. Being an author myself, I know how much time and effort it takes to write a book and put it all together. So, yeah, that's really impressive. It's really good that you managed to write a book within 9 months. And you're right, the editing process can be arduous. It can be more difficult than actually writing the book itself. So well done. You've done a great job. Now, one thing I was intrigued by your book, I Can Write, is that it has a foreword by Sir Michael Morpurgo. Now, how did you meet him, and how did he get involved with the book?
When I was 10, the charity Make-A-Wish arranged for me to meet my literary hero, Michael Morpurgo, and he kindly agreed to write the foreword for my book.
That is amazing. I would really love to meet Michael Morpurgo myself, so I'm actually quite jealous that you've met him. And it was so good as well that he agreed to write the foreword for your book. That's fantastic. But I see that Michael Morpurgo is not the only famous person that you've met. In your book, there are photographs of you meeting Princes William and Harry, as well as members of Parliament. How did this happen? And what important message did you give them?
I received the Diana Legacy Award in recognition of my Teach Us Too campaign in 2017. But my campaign is still ongoing, so any opportunities to be a voice for the voiceless I take. This includes being a member of the SEND Youth Advisory Group for the Department for Education, through which I get to meet with members of Parliament.
Now, your faith is obviously important to you. You've already mentioned it or touched on it a little earlier on in our interview. How did you come to having faith in Jesus?
God is most richly encountered when we lay aside words and engage with Him through our being. Although words enable me to interact with people at a whole new level, I personally decided not to be restricted by them in my thoughts, and instead I continue to think in colour, emotion, and drum beats. So God's presence with me has been continual as we have journeyed together, but trying to frame that relationship in words has been a new challenge since I started writing. Jesus is everything to me. He is my shelter, He is my strength, and He is my joy. I can't wait to live with Him in His garden forever. Without Him in my life, everything would be very different. Jesus is my rock, He is my salvation, and He is my life.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us, Jonathan. One of the things we like to do here on the Christian Book Blurb podcast, we love to talk about books and to hear about faith. But one of the things we like to do is get to know a little bit about the lives of our authors as well. I know you have been sharing already about your life, but I just wanted to find out from you, apart from writing and going to school, what else do you do? Do you have any hobbies or things you like to do for fun?
I love baking, listening to classical music, writing poetry, and listening to a good book. Spending time in the countryside with family or friends is a great way to relax too.
Yeah, I also like going for walks in the countryside as well. Now, here's another question I love to ask authors who come on the show. I know that you're very busy with school and with the charity, but I was wondering, do you have another book coming up soon?
You've got to wait and see.
Oh, Jonathan, you're leaving us in suspense. Goodness. Well, I look forward to seeing or reading whatever it is that you have tucked up your sleeve and are keeping under wraps at the moment. So I will wait and see, and I really look forward to it. Now, I said to our listeners at the beginning, or in the middle actually, of this podcast, that we would let them know where people can find out more about you, as well as the book and the Teach Us To charity online. So have you got websites, or are you on social media? Where could people find your book?
Bear in mind, all of these are I, spelled E-Y-E. You can find my blog at icantalk.net, my Facebook at icantalk, my Twitter at icantalk, my Teach Us To campaign at www.teachus2.org.uk, and you can find my book available on Amazon if you search for I Can Write.
And just for the benefit of our listeners, just to let you know that I'll be putting a link to Jonathan's website in the description of this podcast. So all you've got to do is click on that, and it should take you where you want to go. Well, that just leaves me to say a huge, big thank you to you, Jonathan, for joining me and for the work that you've put in to help this podcast to actually take place. And thank you also to Jonathan's friend for recording the audio of Jonathan's written answers for us. We really enjoyed hearing what Jonathan has had to say. So thank you both. And as we end this unique episode of the Christian Book Blurb, Jonathan, I wonder if you would close the show for us with reading one of your fabulous poems.
Here's my poem, Song of Voice. As adept fingers point, my silent soul emerges, like the dawn blackbird's song, suddenly breaking the black. Music buried in the mind sings melodies divine of ancient tales yet untold, unfurled to men astound. Whose beauty hears my voice? What depths saddened my pathway? Soaring eagles spread wings. I fly to my destiny.
Thanks for listening to Christian Book Blurb with your host, Matt McChlery. Do give it a like, give it a share, and let your friends know all about it. We do hope to see you again soon on another Christian Book Blurb.